All right, before we get that far, let's go to the second half of the double feature from the Dome that I watched. Not the main event now. I'm told, I'm informed by you that you know, I'll tell you one thing. Who'd you say was in the main event again at the Tokyo Dome after this match between Ostrich and Olivier?
Jay White and Okada.
Okay, if that had been Stan Hansen and Bruiser Brody and this match had gone on before them, they would have beat the out of Olivier and Ostrich for leaving them absolutely nothing. Nobody in the business has anything to do anymore.
But you can kick out of everything nowadays.
Well, no, not even nowadays. This was even especially egregious. But and I'm going to shock some people. Before we get too much farther, stay tuned for the shock. It'll come in a little while. I am going to say some good things about Kenny Olivier in this little segment here, or at least some positive things. My overall opinion has not changed. But I can see at this point, not only can I see where some segment of people would like what this guy does over there, but also I believe I may have psychoanalyzed him based on the production that we saw from the Tokyo Dome. Anyway, speaking of production, New Japan, I mean, and they've got a stadium there. What was the crowd? Do we have any idea what the attendance was? You can probably Google it by the time I finish this thought, but
I'll look it up.
Even though they've got a stadium, they take more space away from the setup than the WWE does for their video screen and their entrance and their whole production setup, and it looks fantastic. And I know that WWE has the money to do it, but they don't. This looks grander and larger to me. And the PA sounds even more majestic, and the lighting, and they even again, the only entrances I saw was these two yahoos. But if they did this anymore, they choreographed some of the guys' movements. When old Twinkle Toes had his left arm stick out on the big screen behind him, a wing of a bird, or the angel, I guess, for his gimmick was spread out on the video screen. This was a big deal. Bird wings, fire, ominous music, choreography with the video.
26,000.
Okay, there's 26,000 people in it. Tokyo Dome seats 60,000 or whatever. So they had some space to play with. And are they back to full capacity, or is that what they were allowed to have?
That's what they were allowed to have, I believe.
Okay, so again, but they still always do the big production. So they put a lot of time and effort into it. That was incredible. And after all of this, then they zoom in on our friend Kenny.
Can I say one thing if we're talking about the production? One complaint. And I traditionally have liked Japanese wrestling the last 15 years or so, a little more than you, and you and I both love classic Japanese wrestling. I think they rely on the floor cam too much. There's too much stuff shot from ringside.
Yeah.
I wish I could see more of it with a wide shot to really get the perspective. And they're in the Dome and you wouldn't even know it because it's not a terribly loud crowd on their best day, and it's dark everywhere.
They didn't light it up. Did they not light it up because they didn't want to show that the people were spread out and that it was sparse, or that may be the case?
I don't know. I mean, you can't really hide that, especially culturally, if everyone knows that's the case. But to me, I always loved the Mid-South Coliseum stuff where it was from a distance and you got to see everything happening. I don't always like the floor cam stuff as much. And this, it feels like it's been years, but it hit me watching this match. Just everything is from the floor.
I agree with you there. Especially on the entrances. And that's where I was going with that. They had the big wide shot at first and everything looked majestic. And then they zoom in with the floor camera on Kenny, and he turns around and the first thing he does is make a funny face. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, Abdullah the Butcher made funny faces, and so did Bruiser Brody, and so did the Sheik. Well, but they were a lot scarier to begin with. He just makes a funny face, and you look at, why is that guy making a funny face? But nevertheless, he comes down, he's got the big entrance, And again, they do sync everything up with his, with his music and blah, blah, blah. And he's got the cool outfit on, whatever it may be. He's that had to be from some video game, or it looks like the cover of something somebody'd wear on a video game. And you can see on his face when he gets in and he does the poses and he does the whole thing. This, I think, is what he thinks he is and has always wanted to be, is a character in a cool video game with a cool outfit where he does the poses and the gesturing. He's playing a part in his mind, and wrestling was the only thing that he could figure out that he could do in the real, actual existing world to be a video game character. So that's why he became a wrestler. That's why he has never, he's had these bizarre views about wrestling. He's never given a shit about the conventions of wrestling or the origins of wrestling, or he wants to expand what we can do with our art, because wrestling was his venue to be a video game character, to not be Tyson, whoever he is, but this person he's created in his mind, Kenny Omega, the cleaner in a video game. And I know people are going to say, well, goddamn, a lot of guys create gimmicks in wrestling. Yet at least they were earmarked for wrestling. They created wrestling gimmicks. They didn't create a gimmick for something else and then figure out the only way he could really get a chance to do it and wear all those cool outfits and do that cool shit was to be a wrestler. But that's why he doesn't care about wrestling. So, I think can you say that anything he's ever said that has been reported in public would contradict that thought?
Well, it definitely appears he wants to do something in the arts, in the theater, and this just happens to be the forum that he is currently employed in.
All right, so here comes Will Ostrich, and I'm surprised that he could walk in that robe. Feathers and leather and spikes and studs, and I don't know I expected to see a rooster's ass hanging off the back of that thing. But we've gone from Stan Hansen and Bruiser Brody to Harpo, Fingerfuck, and Will Ostrich. Not semifinaling in Japan. So now they ring the bell and they started wrestling, and it looked good. And one guy went for a double leg and they slid by and they're grappling with each other, headlock takeover. He was both of them being serious. And I'm saying, well, wait a minute. All right. I've misjudged some people here. And I swear to God, they did that for about 45 seconds. And then there was some cartwheels and a couple of round-offs. And the first big dive over the top rope and the big bumps on the floor came at a minute and a half into this thing, which is going to go 30 minutes. And I'm like, all right, they're certainly not leaving much for later. And I will say, again, I understand why, for the newer audience that they like the video game wrestling, because it's a new thing. Video game wrestling is a new thing, so the video game wrestling audience is a new thing, because they didn't have it before, so there was no audience for it. And for those people who don't give a shit whether it makes any sense or it's in any way believable, and they scoff at actual pro wrestling, I can understand in this environment, in this presentation, why you would like Kenny, because he does treat this more seriously over there. You can tell this is his fantasy. And I know it's the big show at the Dome, but still, anything I see from him over there, he works harder. He treats it somewhat. I mean, you can't make that goofy face of his serious throughout the whole match. He's going to make some goofy faces, and he's going to do some stupid looking things, but he's working harder. He treats it more seriously. He does the acrobatics, but they've got a little more snap to him. And that's the thing, his acrobatics are flawless. If you notice, he can't strike. His flat of the foot kicks look like a goddamn whooping crane with a broken leg. and it's an awkward body movement. He doesn't kick with the toe of the boot or the top of the boot or get any snap in that. He's just awkward. It's like a trick circus horse counting to 3. He can't throw a punch, and his forearms look like shit, especially compared to Ospreay's, who was laying him in somewhat. But his body movements on strikes look awkward. But his acrobatics, his dives with the pose over the top and his flips off the top are, flawless. So, again, he's a great athlete, but not for simulating a combat sport. And I'll tell you one thing. Here's another thing, a good thing I can say about him, though. He gets the idea of remember I've talked about a Vader buckle whip, where old Leon would just grab a guy by the arm and just shoot him across the ring and not take a step with him. The guy'd have to run 20 feet to the opposite corner by himself. And at least Leon was 400 pounds, but still, that was a weak spot in his game. Well, I swear to God, the first thing I saw was Ostrich do a Vader whip, and Kenny took off at 100 miles an hour all the way across the ring. But then when the shoe was on the other foot and Kenny was giving Willie the buckle, Kenny gave Ostrich one of the best buckles I've ever seen. Not only went with it, but leaned into it, flung him, boom. And he sells it. It was a great fucking turnbuckle, right? And then Kenny does, and strips off the turnbuckle pad. You know, the New Japan weird pads where they're not individual, but a strip that covers the whole corner. And he strips the turnbuckle pad off. Okay, we're 4 minutes in and we're starting to do angles. All right. But he tried to buckle Will. Will fought out, but Kenny kicked him back into the buckle back first and then gave him a backbreaker and got a 2 count. So that's a pay-per-view finish. You kick the guy into the fucking exposed buckle. That's why you expose the buckle. He went back first into the buckle, then took a backbreaker, got a 2 count, 4 minutes in. 1 finish down, but nevertheless. Now here's the problem. They left the pad off, and for the next 25 minutes, the referee never makes one fucking motion about trying to repair the damaged equipment. Like, that's why you do that, either behind the referee's back so he doesn't notice or later on in the match. Nevertheless, they were laying their shit in, even though sometimes it was preposterous. And at one time, I swear to God, Ospreay, did you see the thing where he somehow ran up Kenny's front and backflipped off of him, landed on his feet, and then enziguri'd him? Do you remember that?
I did, yeah.
Now that looked fucking incredible. So he does the run up off of Kenny, foils whatever the fuck, lands on his feet, hits the enziguri, and the people popped. He didn't even cover him. They just rolled out to the fucking apron so they could go fight on the apron and the referee could stand there not counting on him. And I'm thinking, how the fuck? That was one of the most impressive things in the match. And that you don't highlight a move like that and set up a whole fucking build to doing it when you can do it like that sets these guys that they don't take direction or they've never been given direction, because that's why you take a bunch of fucking tall guys that can jump and teach them how to play basketball instead of just giving them a ball and telling them to figure it out. But anyway, so they tried to do something on the apron. Ospreay jumped off backwards, but Kenny held the ropes, and Ospreay hit the apron back first and bounced to the floor. And there's a believable count-out angle they could have done on national television to come back for a pay-per-view match, because it was a goddamnest bump. But then Kenny pulls the table out from under the ring. I'm like, fuck. Even here, you can't get away from it.
Well, it seems like their wood is a little cheaper than our wood.
Well, it was because our tables are now Formica, but they're still the old time particle board. So Kenny puts the table on Ospreay on the floor upside down, goes to the top rope or to the apron, and jumps off and does the double stomp on him, and his feet went through it and made a big hole in it. So in the middle of this sudden life or death struggle where they're doing all this shit to each other, he sticks his face through the fucking hole in the table and goes, "Here's Kenny." So 10 minutes he was serious. And then who is the baby face? Who's the heel here? People were just cheering for moves. Did anybody care who actually won?
I mean, people cared, but I don't know if either one would classify as the babyface or the heel in this situation.
So then as long as somebody won, people didn't care who it was, is what you're saying.
I think so.
Well, there you go. So that's a good reason to fucking mutilate your body if they don't care whether you or the other guy fucking wins. Nevertheless, so as Kenny has come with the double stomp onto the table, onto Ospreay, on the floor, Ospreay immediately jumps up to his feet and fires a big comeback on the floor, just fucking lefts and rights and bang, bang, and then grabs Kenny and gives him a vertical suplex onto the broken table that's laying there on the floor, and then jumps up to the top rope and backflips off of it onto Kenny, onto the floor. After the shit that had just been done to him, immediately he just jumped up. And then I realized, wait a minute, they've been out there a while. So I went back and looked and then came back to the point I left off. They were there on the floor for 3 solid minutes doing all this shit, with the referee either just standing and staring at him or jumping at every once in a while going, "Get back in the ring." And there's no case. Was this no DQ? Was it no count out? Lazy booking? The announcement was in Japanese, but did I miss? Is this a death match of some kind? Or they just said, "Oh, they got stuff to do on the floor, so we're not paying attention."
There's a lot of selective counting in wrestling today.
It was like watching an NBA dunk contest. Yeah, boy, those are the goddamnest dunks I've ever seen, but there's nobody guarding. There's nobody playing defense. Everybody's getting a free shot. So anyway, the crowd, I said, it was applauding moves. Oh, and then did you see... Will puts Ken... I'm trying to figure out how to explain this visually, but this was a great spot in the match. You know how you stand up on the second rope near the turnbuckles when you're going to grab a guy and give him a superplex, right? You're standing with one foot on each side of the buckle on the middle rope, and you're facing over the post, looking out into the people.
Right.
Well, Ospreay put Kenny... his feet on the second rope. He's looking out there, but he grabs Kenny's head and tucks his head so Kenny looked like he was trying to blow himself. He tucked his head underneath the top turnbuckle. And Kenny sold it like he was stuck there and couldn't get out. His feet were standing on the middle rope. All he had to do was raise either or both foot up, and he would be immediately extricated from this situation. But he sold it like he was stuck there so that Ospreay could kick him in the face in between his legs repeatedly over and over. Even though, as I mentioned, he obviously could get out anytime he wanted. And on the very last kick, Willie just fucking goes to the kind of the side with it, put a little spin on it, and kicked Kenny right in the fucking face, tatered him, and gave him a black eye for a phony spot. These guys were laying their shit in. They were beating the shit out of each other. It's the only time I think I've ever seen where two people were not only beating the shit out of each other for real, but proving the wrestling business was fake at the same time. So then they got on the top rope, and somehow they jockeyed up into a position where they were both standing on the top rope, and then Kenny DDT'd Ospreay on the exposed top turnbuckle and almost killed both of them because they fell in a crumpled mess. And then Ospreay rolled out on the floor, and the Seconds and Stooges started distracting the referee and making noise so that Ospreay could get color for a while. And then Kenny got a chance to do the Twinkle Toes routine where he does the Canterbury prancing into the ropes on both sides and does a big graceful dive. And at that point, he leaned the table up on the railing and started running Ospreay's head into the broken table, and he was putting his own head through. He was breaking more of the table. He was committed to this. He was headbutting through the goddamn table. And, you know, I'm thinking that would be a great spot too. And that's different. You don't usually see that. But after all this other shit, I'm like, God, will this ever end? But again, you can tell the difference in Kenny there and AEW. His stuff looks better. He works harder. That's his thing. That's his fantasy. And AEW is a domestic paycheck. And of course, nobody in this country is going to, well, I can't say that. Fuck, there's 15 of them on AEW. Nobody means anything on a main event level in this country is going to let Kenny do all this shit to him that he's doing to Ospreay, so they couldn't replicate it on AEW television, but good God. So then Kenny hit a great double arm pile driver like Scotty Steiner used to do. It looked beautiful. Cover 1-2, and Ostrich gets his leg on the ropes. Every bump, every move that could possibly be done nothing's working. I've made note, at least, these are random observations, folks. I laugh about Kenny's facials. At least he makes some. Ostrich's is just generally confused or blank. So the referee has never made any attempt to put that pad back on now, 20 minutes later. So Kenny got nutted on the exposed turnbuckle pad. But that didn't seem to be a problem because seconds afterwards, he dropped Ospreay face first onto the metal buckle, and again didn't even go for a cover. The guy just had his face rammed into the metal turnbuckle, which gave Kenny the idea to put him on the top rope, climb up there, put him on his shoulders like they're having a chicken fight, and then pop him up over his head and then German suplex him from there off the top rope for a 2 count. What? Not even coming into discussion the idea that all of that required so much cooperation and or at least patience and or lack of defense from the Ostrich. If you were trying to win the fucking match when the guy just got knocked out face first into the metal buckle, would you want to take the chance on going up on the top rope yourself to do all this shit and potentially land on your own head to defeat an unconscious person? But the German suplex off the top rope was a 2 count. And then Kenny started doing the leg slap knee lifts that are actually shins to the left side of the chest. And they went through the part in the match where they would hit each other back and forth with everything quickly and nobody would sell anything. And then somebody would do something big and they would both sell. And as soon as they both finished selling, they would jump up and be 100% going 100 miles an hour. What was the purpose of Willie pulled off his elbow pad like his arm is the size of Stan Hansen's and ran across the ring and slapped his leg while blowing his elbow straight over the top of Kenny's head, and Kenny sold it like he was knocked out?
I don't have an
answer. Did you see that?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for you what that was.
Is that the way it's supposed to look? Does it look like that all the time? Did Kenny not know that he missed him? What happened there?
I don't know.
All right. They're beating the complete shit out of each other, folks, at the same time that all the shit looks fake. Then they stood there and did the pissy-looking forearm exchange while they were legitimately holding hands. Why were they holding hands, Brian?
Support.
They were standing in front of each other, and I forget who was on which side, but one guy's left hand was holding the other guy's right hand, and they were hitting with forearms. And Kenny was the one that was having to use his left forearm because his right hand was being held. And his strikes looked like dog shit anyway. So Ospreay would have won this exchange, but it wasn't. It was the forearms to the jaw and it bing, bing, bing. And then suddenly, Kenny hit a German suplex, got a 2 count, and then Kenny held both of Will's wrists like he was going to do the double wrist German, but instead they turned over where they were just holding, now they're holding both of each other's hands. Kenny's holding his wrists. And Will looks up and spits at him and says, "Fuck you." So Kenny did the knee that misses and looks like shit. It's the shin to the fucking chest with another leg slap, and then picked him up and hit the one-winged fairy 1, 2, 3. And that was it. That was the finish. After all that other shit. Bumps through furniture onto concrete with exposed metal turnbuckles to the heads. And suddenly they hold hands, exchange forearms, German suplex, hold hands some more, miss a knee, one-winged fairy, which there were 100 bigger bumps, and he just beat him flat. It was like they didn't, people say, oh, they built to the finish through the whole match. Well, it was goddamn flattered and piss on a plate about 30 seconds before it came. The people were not standing screaming 30 seconds before the fucking 1, 2, 3 came. It just, they ran out of shit to do and then did a finish. Out of nowhere.
What'd you think of Ospreay selling?
You know, he's the kind of kid, if you'd come along 25 years ago and you'd have put him in a wrestling school and started him out in a territory and not let him get whatever mind he's got to think that this is kind of proper shit to do. He's got the idea to do this athletically. He can sell. Here's the thing. Kenny comes closer or will come closer or has come closer. He'll never be closer than he's already been to being a main event level star in the United States than Ospreay will. Because Ospreay still, unless he changes his look completely and becomes a caveman as he ages, right now he looks like a mop-topped 18-year-old kid with an okay body, and he's very athletic, and his shit looks good, and it's video game wrestling. He could have been taught psychology, what wrestling actually is. I think it's probably too late. And then, honestly, he wouldn't be in the spot he's in now because he doesn't look like anything that's ever going to be a main event guy in this country. Kenny comes closer because he's got the fucking body for it a little bit better, but his mental state is even worse. Because you can tell Ospreay at least gets something of how to sell when he wants to, and his shit looks better overall than Kenny's does by far. He just doesn't have any personality whatsoever. So each of them, they're probably in the best place for him in the whole world right there, because New Japan has fostered this environment, the ominous music, the big entrances. They're somewhat protected over there from doing really stupid shit, probably. Because why would Kenny do so much goofy or stupid shit over here and not there unless they don't let him do it there? And he works harder there. So neither one of these guys, mentally or physically, is ever going to main event WrestleMania or be a major level star of the level of Lesnar, Reigns, Cena, whatever the fuck, in the United States. But it works there with that presentation. So I can understand why the people that like that kind of wrestling would like them there. But, you know, again, it just ruins everything for everybody else. These two fucking self-indulgent assholes going out there and killing every goddamn move and finish ever. But if they're going to let them do it, but there's a limited audience for this kind of style, and AEW's got all of them already. And Kenny has never even been the top guy in AEW.
Well, there are people in AEW who would argue that, but let me ask you this. There are people in AEW who think when he was the world champion, he may have been the top guy.
Oh, come on. I'm talking about the most important guy, the most well-known guy, the guy for ratings, the guy for whatever. Top guy. Jericho's been a lot longer and or closer than Kenny ever was.
I agree with that. Looking at this match and looking beyond this match, I understand why so many people loved it. Dave Meltzer gave it 6.25 stars. I didn't think it was that good. I thought it was really good. But the end, however long you want to count it, the last 6 minutes, the last 10 minutes, I'm not a big fan of all the shit on the floor. There was a lot of that. But the ending sequences with nonstop kickouts of just big, brutal moves. Could you explain whether it's the match after this or whether it's the show after this, the next week after this, whatever it is? What kind of damage does that do, actually? The idea that everyone can kick out of everything, or in a big match like this, it's just nonstop kickouts out of brutal moves. I mean, these guys look like they were banged up really badly at the end of this.
Yeah, they were.
Because they were.
It's amazing. They both beat the shit out of each other for real and managed to make everything fake at the same time. It's stunning. There's different effects. The effect immediately on the match that followed it was, how are you going to follow it? What else are they going to do to... and I mean, again, we're talking about the end of a 5-hour show. And I'm sure they didn't show a lot of restraint in the underneath matches either. But the immediate effect for the people in the building, they still came to see that show and they're still going to like the main event. But how much can you scream and how much energy do you have? And also, how shocking could they make anything, or surprising could they make anything, or just what could they do to get the people up into their match, following all of that hadn't already been done, to take the edge off of it in some form. And I can say they could actually perform the shit really more believably and correctly and more psychologically literate or sensical. And that would be one thing. And you still can. I'm not saying the people just walked out after that, but it takes the edge off what apparently New Japan considered its main event, or elsewise they'd have put the other match on last. So you're disrespectful.
The other match was on last.
No, that's what I'm saying. It takes the edge off what New Japan considered their main event, or they would have put the Omega and Ospreay match on last. When they went out and did all that stuff, even if the people still liked the main event, it took some of the edge, some of the pop off. It just naturally has to when there's almost nothing left. And then you ask what effect. It doesn't necessarily have an effect on the next show. It doesn't necessarily have an effect on next month. It's think about this. If we were talking 20 years ago, we'd be saying, oh my God, can you believe that the guy kicked out of whatever the fuck that they kicked out of 5 times last week? Or can we be saying, well, they had a big angle where they had a backstage fight and holy shit, this will get some people talking. But now 20 years later, they have 4 every week on every show. So it's a cumulative effect of just showing people that, okay, in a wrestling context, human beings can survive this. and there'll be no ill consequences for anybody from it. And if you see that enough, and like here in this country, as we've said, the table is useless. The table is fucking useless every week, every show, multiple times. Who gives a shit? Means nothing. All the stuff that means the attack in the parking lot, the attack in the backstage area, the fucking anything that's overdone means nothing. And what they're doing there is the equivalent of overdoing angles with overdoing wrestling moves. How the fuck many angles and finishes could you have got out of... They perpetrated most of this stuff amazingly. by the luck of idiots and fools, they didn't paralyze themselves. Most of the shit looked good, except for some of the wild flips where they just went past each other and, pretended. But at some point, you've got to say, okay, how can the human being and the human body not be defeated by this? And then in that case, are they going to buy the next guy's finish? Are they going to buy the next angle we try to do? Or what do we got to do to hurt this guy for him to come back for revenge? Literally goddamn set him on fire. That's the problem. Like the old Roy Shire thing. He told Stevens and Patterson, don't have a match like that again. It was too good. You guys are going to leave next month, but I got to promote here for the rest of my life. How are you going to follow it? There's at some point you get there, don't you?
Well, we shall see. We know Omega's banged up. Ospreay, boy. I mean, he's a young guy. He's got to be hurting.
And that's another thing. Didn't this guy, Kenny, just got finished having everything from his nose to his toes repositioned or sewed back up, all these injuries, and he goes out there and does that? Again, why does New Japan as a company want that? Because where are they going to find any fucking moron that will do this or more in 2 years? How are they going to follow it? So anyway, yeah, I see his appeal to a segment of people who don't give a fuck about wrestling. And boy, in that New Japan environment and on their big shows with their presentation and whatever the fuck else they do to produce him or ride herd over him, he looks like a big star in a video game. So I can see why some people would like that. It didn't change my opinion of him. And this, Jesus Christ, I don't even know what to say about the match. If, like I said, it's an NBA dunk contest. If you just are allowed to do whatever you can fucking do with no rules under the parameter of no game and with the opponents either standing by idly or actively helping you, yeah, you can put a lot of shit together.
For the record, he wouldn't be the star in any video game that I play.
Well, I don't know who the cast of most of those video games are. But what do you know, Brian, about what's going on in the world of the Arcadian Vanguard Network and the wrestling news this week?
Another very exciting week for the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network. Get information about all the shows on Twitter at Superpodcasts or on Facebook at facebook.com/Arcadian Vanguard. A few notes. Of course, subscribe to the wrestling news and every morning get caught up with all the wrestling news with our free daily morning wrestling newscast. Look for Arcadian Vanguard's The Wrestling News wherever you find your favorite podcast, or subscribe and download directly at thewrestlingnews.com. Also want to make mention of Shut Up and Wrestle with Brian Solomon. I will be the guest on next week's show. 2 hours plus of me and Brian Solomon talking about everything and nothing. Check that out and go through the archives today. SUAWpod.com. Look for Shut Up and Wrestle with Brian Solomon wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Like I said, I'll be on next week's episode. And of course, the 605 Superpodcast, The Mothership! Yeah, it wasn't a good one. Go through the archive today at 605pod.com. We're working on something. Stay tuned. And go through the archive at 605pod.com. Available wherever you find your favorite podcasts. The Mothership.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.